Joanna would lock herself in the room with him and they would put on cartoons for the kids. Over time, it even got to the point where Piotr was in the apartment too. He knew exactly what was going on. He knew that Jacek was his wife's lover. Hello, welcome to another episode of Criminalny Patrol. This is Piotr's story. We usually, of course, tell stories that are tragic, that are sad. This one is, I would say, exceptionally sad because in all of this, it's also about one man's fate. A man who just had some terrible bad luck in this life. What happened, those twists in his life, well, he wanted things to be completely different. Because he wanted things to be different, well, things turned out the way they did. I invite you to watch the next episode.
Do you like watching Criminalny Patrol? Help us record new episodes. Support us through Hero and watch us without ads, plus get access to additional content that's not available anywhere else. Go to herohero.co Criminalny Patrol. The link is also in the description below the video.
Piotr was just an ordinary, normal guy. Like any boy, he played soccer, ran around, laughed, rode his bike, and had friends and buddies. He had a slight defect in his shoulder. Well, he needed a correction, I would say, more like an orthopedic procedure. And for a long time, his parents couldn't decide whether he should have the procedure, but when he turned 14, they decided not to go through with it. They would do such a correction of his arm. So the operation took place, but it turned out, and that was a shock. It was probably some mistake by the doctors who were doing this minor, seemingly simple correction because Piotr stopped walking. He had partial paralysis in his legs, he couldn't move, and this normal, healthy boy up until then simply became disabled. He had to sit in a wheelchair, and from then on he moved around only in that wheelchair. The parents took it very hard. They blamed themselves because, after all, they didn't have to agree to the procedure, which seemed like it would be safe. They blamed themselves. They tried to help Piotr through all of this, maybe even too much, because they started to isolate him from people. They blamed themselves. They were deeply affected. They blamed everything. But Piotr, despite this tragedy, somehow managed to cope. Maybe it was because his parents were very religious believers and he himself was very devout. He didn't break down. He accepted it somewhat, saying it was God's will that it had to be this way. He sat in that wheelchair, but he didn't intend to give up the life he had before. And he still wanted to actively participate in that life. Piotr wanted to become a priest. That faith made him truly want to choose that path. He wanted to study at the Faculty of Theology at the University of Warmia and Mazuri. But unfortunately, he wasn't accepted to that faculty because he was using a wheelchair. Perhaps the church hadn't yet considered that a priest might use a wheelchair. He wasn't accepted. That was the second major blow in his life. Despite that, he became very involved in the life of Caritas. Before that, he used to go to retreats and go to church youth camps. He was kind of a coordinator for the school Caritas clubs. He went from person to person, organized help, and encouraged others to offer such assistance. And always, well, everyone who worked with him, those who knew him, knew that if something bad happened, they could always count on Piotr. Piotr is very much involved in all of this. He is a volunteer. He actually lives in Olsztyn, in the Nagorki neighborhood. Like most neighborhoods, it's very similar to others. Typically, his days are also, I would say, very similar, repetitive. The same people, the same habits. Piotr initially got around in his wheelchair. Sometimes he would travel many kilometers to visit someone just to help them. He would return in his wheelchair, and sometimes neighbors saw him coming and wanted to give him a ride. He would say no, that he could manage on his own. And it was true, even despite the long distance, he would come back in his wheelchair. Later, he bought a car. Of course, he adapted that car to his own needs. And it seemed that he was somehow satisfied with all of this. But unfortunately, another blow followed. This time it was the death of his father, and another blow was his mother's illness because his mother developed Alzheimer's. But despite this, it was clear that he was somehow at peace with all of it, that he was coping. Very often neighbors saw him putting his mother into the car and driving together to church. I don't think anyone knew that Piotr had a dream deep down inside. His dream was to have a normal family, to have a wife and children. It's 2010. Piotr is 31 years old at that time. He also works at the Crisis Intervention Center in Olsztyn. In April 2010, Joanna comes to that center. Even for the staff who are used to various situations. All kinds of life tragedies, you could say. Well, Joanna somehow made an impression. A young woman, only 26 years old, but surrounded by a bunch of children, 4 kids. The 5th was on the way. It turned out that Joanna basically lives in a camper trailer. At first she lived with her parents, but then she got involved with some older guy, with some older man. He was aggressive, a drunk. She had a hard life with him, a hard life also because of their living conditions, living in a trailer with 4 little kids while she was pregnant. So at the moment when this man disappeared somewhere, he left, but he probably would have come back. She decided to look for help. That's when she took the kids. And she ended up at the Crisis Intervention Center in Olsztyn. And that's where she started living. Piotr also got very involved in helping Joanna, in helping those children. He grew fond of those kids. He organized trips for them, some meetings. He talked to them a lot. He also organized lessons for them. Material support. He also became very attached to those children. Naturally, he also started talking to Joanna. Here, a kind of bond of understanding developed between them. And he really was a support and a guardian for them. He was very much involved in helping Joanna and her children. Warunki. The conditions at the center are such that even a mother in as difficult a situation as Joanna's cannot stay there for more than 3 months. July 2010 comes. Joanna has to leave the center. And then Piotr suggests to her and to the children that they should all just move into his apartment. Many people advised him against it, saying, "Man, what are you doing? You have a mother with Alzheimer's at home. And then there's a woman with 4 children. Soon the 5th will be born. You're in a wheelchair. How are you going to handle all of this? It doesn't make sense." But Piotr decided that's how it's going to be. And indeed, Joanna with the children, she moves in with him. Soon the 5th is born. It seemed like everything was going in the right direction. That, as they say, sometimes miracles just happen. That was how it seemed things would go for Piotr and Joanna. People saw him riding in that wheelchair, surrounded by those children. He was still holding the smallest child on his lap, and that's how they went through the neighborhood. Some people noticed that Piotr looked better, and he's clean, well fed. So it seemed that everything was going in the right direction. What's more, in January 2011, they both even decided to get married. The wedding took place in a parish near Olsztyn. A lot of the people who had been invited to the wedding didn't come, because somehow it seemed to them that this wedding didn't really make sense, that Piotr was making some kind of unreasonable decision, and simply despite being invited to the wedding, they didn't come. But Piotr got married, and everything was going as well as possible. Even Mom, who was sick, sometimes she didn't know who the people in the apartment were, but when she had better days, then she recognized those children. They even called her grandma. They called Piotr Dad. So everyone in some way got along well. At first, Joanna also did what she could, or so it seemed, but slowly her attitude toward Piotr started to change. She was becoming more and more rude, arrogant. She started hurling all sorts of snide insults at him. She would pick on him because of his disability. Piotr took it in good faith. He said she had recently given birth to her fifth child. So many responsibilities. She's overwhelmed with work. Maybe she'll get over it and things will get better. But things didn't get better. It seemed like it was getting worse day by day. That Joanna was becoming more and more aggressive. She was picking on Piotr more and more. She started yelling at him. And the situation was slowly becoming uncomfortable, barely tolerable. The atmosphere just got worse. Especially since she often made her remarks in front of the children. The kids were confused. Because here they called Piotr Dad. He took care of them. And then their mom would say some hurtful things. But something was wrong with Joanna. It got to the point where she would just leave the house. She wouldn't even come back for the night. She would come back the next day. During that time, he stayed with the kids. He took care of the kids. These arguments started happening more and more often. Joanna was getting more and more aggressive. The neighbors were just fed up with all of it, with the sounds of the fights. They started calling the police. One of the neighbors testified that he saw Piotr trying to leave the apartment in his wheelchair. She ran after him. She was shouting. She was waving something at him. When the police came to the apartment, Joanna said that nothing like that happened, that Piotr was the aggressive one, that he was abusing them. She tried to explain herself that way. Yes, there were also situations where he would simply get out of her line of fire, so to speak. When there was an argument, he would ride around the neighborhood in his wheelchair. Sometimes it lasted for several hours. You could see that he didn't want to go back home. He was basically wandering around aimlessly, just waiting for it all to pass. And they saw that Piotr just couldn't handle all of it. One day he left the house in the evening, but he never came back home. April 30th, 2013. His body was found not far from the apartment building. The wheelchair was lying overturned. He was in the bushes, undressed. His body was completely naked. There were no belongings. It seemed that Piotr had been attacked, that he had been murdered and robbed, because there were actually no belongings on him, neither a cell phone nor a wallet. Well, of course, the police started doing all those routine procedures, the crime scene examination. Everything pointed to that, and later the autopsy confirmed it. That Piotr was strangled. He was strangled with a leather belt. The belt was still hanging around his neck. The police started following those tracks, or rather the trail that the dog pointed out. Well, it turned out that probably Piotr was attacked earlier when he was riding along the sidewalk through the neighborhood. That later the bandits, the killers, simply dragged him into those bushes. They undressed him. They also didn't notice that at the moment when they were dragging Piotr's body, His wallet fell out of his pocket, so because of that, the police quickly found out where he lived. They went to his apartment. At that time, Joanna was in the apartment. There was also a neighbor, about 40 years old, the neighbor Jacek. She was surprised because, as she told the police officers, Piotr was supposed to leave on some church matters. And he was supposed to come back only after a few days. That neighbor, Jacek, as it turned out, the police later determined this. He was Joanna's lover sometime earlier. He simply lived in the same building. He started coming over to their place. He did some small chores here and there. Then he and Joanna started talking, drinking alcohol. Eventually they became lovers. It often happened that Joanna would lock herself in a room with him. They would put on cartoons for the kids. With time, it also happened that even Piotr was in the apartment. He knew very well what was going on. He knew that Jacek was his wife's lover. They weren't embarrassed by anything. Piotr's presence didn't bother them. He couldn't stand it. Then he would leave with his wheelchair, and he would ride around the neighborhood. It led to some bizarre situations, because he knew what was happening in that apartment, that they were lovers. He would simply call Joanna and ask if he could come back yet, and when she said he could, he would. Then he would simply come back to the apartment. It seemed that in his naivety he kept believing that the situation would work itself out, that she would simply come back to him and they would build the life he dreamed of. A normal family. In all of this, Piotr shows an almost unimaginable patience. You could say it's naivety, but maybe he just loved Joanna. That's why he endured all of this patiently. When she disappeared for a few days, he took care of the kids. He bought them something to eat. Often he didn't have any money himself, so he borrowed from the neighbors. She basically forced him to do it, because there were situations like that. She would just throw him out of the apartment. Some people even saw it. Sometimes he would fall over in his wheelchair because she pushed him, later saying it was just a joke. So he would go to friends and tell them about it. That he was slowly getting tired of all this, that he might divorce her, but he never actually did anything like that. He would just wait it out and then go back home, probably hoping for something. That somehow all of this would work out. I think what really broke the camel's back was this. That at the beginning of 2013 in January, Joanna gave birth to her sixth child. But it turned out that it wasn't Piotr's child, it was Jacek's child. Her lovers, that's when Piotr decided that this was definitely the end, that he would divorce her. He told her about it, that he wouldn't give her anything, he would disinherit her, he would disinherit the children. And she would simply have to leave the apartment, and then there was this kind of fear. Joanna was terrified because she realized that after all, she doesn't have any place, she doesn't have any apartment, there's no chance for her to get an apartment. She lives comfortably in Piotr's apartment. Well, she got furious. To put it bluntly, she grabbed a knife and she forced Piotr to flee that apartment. The situation changed dramatically, because at that time she stayed in Piotr's apartment and Piotr moved to a crisis intervention center. But Piotr doesn't give up. At that point, he's determined. He actually goes to court. He files for divorce. He also filed a motion for the eviction of Joanna and the children. But she knows about it. She knows everything. She's also desperate, just in a completely different way. She tells Jacek that she'll end up on the street. She has no other choice. But Piotr has to disappear. They involve a third person in all of this. That's Łukasz. He's a friend of Jacek's. Also a man who He has several children. He also likes to drink. He's friends with Jacek in a way. And he says, well, in this situation, he'll help Joanna and he'll help Jacek. Pozbyć się Piotra. A decision is made about it. That Piotr has to disappear. They decide on it that very night, on the night of April 29th to 30th, 2013. Joanna is aware of this, that Piotr, being in the crisis intervention center, well, he won't come back home on his own. So she writes him a text message, something like this, that everything is possible, everything can be saved. She asks him to come, and so they can talk. Piotr, maybe deep down inside, was waiting for all of this. He actually decided to do it, to talk with his wife. They arranged to have that conversation, not far from the stairwell. At 11 p.m. on April 29th, when Piotr shows up in his wheelchair, Joanna comes out of the stairwell. She suggests a walk. They go down that alley. Not far from the playground, she walks. About a meter ahead, he follows behind. And he tells her that he will forgive her for everything, that everything will surely work out. And so he tries in some way to say all of this, to tell, maybe to argue more with himself. He doesn't know that at that time Jacek and Lukasz are in the bushes. They're lying in wait for him when he was passing by. They jumped on him. They knocked him over along with the wheelchair. Then they threw a noose around him from that belt around his neck, and they started dragging him into the bushes. From later accounts, during interrogations, during the court trial, that's what comes out, that it was Jacek who tightened it. A belt around his neck, and strangled him. When they realized that he was dead, they simply undressed him, took all his things that he had, clothes, items that they found. They didn't notice along the way that his wallet simply fell out with everything in it, and also with those towels they used to cover his face or his mouth. They went to a building, one nearby. They burned everything there. And they were counting on it, that the police simply wouldn't notice, that they would think it was some kind of robbery, and that this way they would get away with it. To avoid any punishment, they would manage to avoid responsibility. The police officers quickly realized that this robbery was rather staged, that someone took all the things, the items exactly for that purpose, so that it would be impossible to find any traces. They thought it was someone from Piotr's closest circle. Among other things, they started checking all the phone records, cell phone location data. They already had information about it. That Jacek is Joanna's lover. Well, they started checking all of this, and it turned out all the phones were showing up in the same place. So the interrogations began. They confessed to that. Then Łukasz was also detained. And from all of this, exactly, a plan appeared, the kind of scheme I told you about, even Joanna herself. She didn't admit that they had planned to kill Piotr, that they only wanted to teach him a lesson, scare him a little, so that he would withdraw the lawsuit, and his death, that was kind of an accident in the process. Not very credible, because it was clearly evident that they wanted to kill him despite Joanna's crying in the first instance. She and Jacek got life sentences. The appellate court reduced their sentence to 25 years in prison. Lukasz was sentenced to 15 years. In total, Piotr's death in Olsztyn was, of course, a huge shock. A lot of people knew him. Over the years, he helped a lot of people. Everyone knew him despite those difficulties, despite everything he went through himself. He was known as a very kind person, a smiling man who wanted to help others. And indeed, Piotr's life is a very sad one. Constant tragedies, just one stretch of bad luck after another. In everything that happened in his life, he only dreamed about having a family, a wife, children. He thought about raising those children, about giving them a roof over their heads. That's what he simply dreamed of. Because of what happened, because of the way she was, the children ended up in foster families. What will happen to them next? Well, it's hard to say, of course. Like I said at the beginning, the story is especially sad in all of this. And that's it for today's episode. Of course, subscribe to our channel, and as always, take care.
Do you like watching Criminalny Patrol? Help us record new episodes. Support us through Hero and watch us without ads. Plus, get access to additional materials unavailable anywhere else. Go to herohero.co Criminalny Patrol. The link is also in the description below the video.